my life was threatened. He threatened to end my life. And when that happened, I'm like, okay, this is serious. We're not kidding around anymore. There I am in this 5-story home where I thought everything led to all this success, but I was so broken on the inside and so ashamed of what people would think. So ashamed that like, she couldn't keep this marriage.
In today's plot twist episode, Neeta Bhushan, a 3-time international best-selling author and world-renowned emotional health advocate, shares how to recognize when you're stuck in a life that isn't right for you any longer, and why hitting rock bottom can be the wake-up call that you need, and how stepping into the unknown can lead to something better than you've ever imagined.
You now are practicing cosmetic dentistry. You're married. You rebuilt your life. You're successful on paper, but it's not all what it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. I used my 20s to really prove myself. And it started in Rome. It started in Rome where like I could create whatever I want because I ended up there and I could share whatever I choose to share in order to be accepted, in order to not be the weird one, in order to not be the weird girl that has all of this drama in her life. These were the beliefs that I had in my head or the stories that I had in my head. So, very pivotal point in my life, December 31st, 2011, where I thought I had done such a good job of convincing to the outside world that I had made it, that I had this very lucrative practice. It was a 7-figure business. I wasn't even 30. I had 10 people working under me. It was all of the ego, the bells and whistles. Every single box was checked off for me proverbially. And I found myself I was married. I had this big dream wedding. I fell in love. And I thought that all of those things were going to mask what I was really feeling. And it didn't, because I was literally in a toxic relationship. I was in an abusive marriage. And December 31st was literally the day that I actually admitted to myself, because I was in such denial to my family, such denial to my friends, and more importantly, such denial to myself, because I had been now spiritually broken, mentally just completely off, emotionally distraught. Physically, I was in fear. And that would then take me through the darkest night of the soul of leaving haphazardly in the middle of the night. This was New Year's Eve, 2011, and take whatever I could and literally say goodbye to that life. And that would
You
also,
mentioned you were staring in this mirror and looking at all your stuff that you accumulated and all that. But what preceded that night? Because you also mentioned being in court and having your file was like stapled together because there's so many instances of physical
yeah.
abuse. Did something happen? Was there abuse that happened just before you decided this is it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was the cherry on top. It was the last time I would allow him to strike his fist across my face.
Did it ever leave marks, or were you wearing a lot of makeup when you went to work? Did people
Uh,
notice at work? Did
li-
everybody know, but you didn't realize that everybody knew?
I think that if you met us, you'd probably know. Just in, again, I think hurt people, and I'm not going to speak on my ex's behalf, but it's your quintessential codependent relationship, and where it's like the narcissistic and the codependent, perhaps maybe sociopathic. But I really wanted love, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get that, and to be in a relationship where they weren't going to leave me, but it would definitely break me, because I would then be so afraid to leave, because then the emotional conditioning was, you're worthless, you're broken, you're never going to find anyone. And so I empathize with
Well,
so,
everyone else had left you. Everyone you
yeah,
cared about had left you at that
it's
point. So
true.
this is one thing you're holding on to.
So you're holding on to it for dear life. And just, I remember even in my therapist's office, just like full hysterics and saying, I don't know what else to do. And I remember him saying, wow, Neetha, just look at where you have come and you can create a whole new life for yourself. And I would still make excuses because I was in the suck. I was fully in it. And that's where I have so much empathy for women who feel like they have to be, they're stuck in it. And I think that's where it comes. You have to, there's that rock bottom. And I definitely, that was the rock bottom because my life was threatened. He threatened to end my life. And when that happened, I'm like, okay, this is serious. This is we're not kidding around anymore. And who am I kidding? And so there I am in this 5-story home where I thought everything led to all this success, but I was so broken on the inside and so ashamed of what people would think. So ashamed that, she couldn't keep this marriage, or because that was the mentality I grew up in. And God, did it feel so good to leave. But yeah, the first few days, the first few initial weeks, woo, that was dark. It got messy. It got so dark. I don't even talk a lot about the details anymore. Everything that you can ever imagine in a tumultuous divorce came out from me getting a restraining order, standing before the judge. And I remember the judge like putting her glasses down and being like, "What took you so long, honey?" And I remember shaking because I was so afraid at that point of public speaking because I was not the only person in the courtroom. There was a whole line of other women. Some of them had tiny little kids, and I'm like shaking because I'm so afraid of what the world would think. But man, after those words left my mouth, it was like, again, full liberation
Mm.
and full just empowerment, agency, and starting to cultivate that resiliency that I talk about in the book.
So if someone had stopped you going into court that day and said, "Hey, Neeta, you're going to one day become a huge wellness influencer and a leadership coach and entrepreneur. You're going to be giving talks on massive stages and inspiring all these people over the world." Would you believe them? And
No,
you're going to use your story of being abused. You can speak very publicly and openly about it. You can write books.
you're not going to be shaking anymore like you are right
You won't
now.
be shaking anymore. Would you believe them? Would you have thought it would be possible in a million years?
No, not in a million years. Not in a million years. And I think forever, whoever is listening, or maybe you have a friend going through something like this, that's where the mess can really be the magic when we dive into it, when we accept it. It could truly be a lead to your next chapter. And I even remember my divorce lawyer. I was such a hot mess at that time. I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. I went through a lot of betrayal, even in my dental office, and things, like I said, were really dark for a while. And she said, "Neeta, I'm going to talk to you in 5 years and you are going to be a whole different person." And I still remember those
Mm,
words. And it was
mm.
crazy because 5 years later, I'm sending her all of these people because people are coming up to me asking me, like, who do I go to for my divorce? And it's just so interesting that, wow, yeah, it's true. It's true.
Hey, so a lot of you all have been reaching out with your guest suggestions. And look, I appreciate it. I do. And to help make it easier for those guests to say yes to my invitation, I need you to subscribe to this channel. Just hit the subscribe button below, and that's literally the best way to help me get you that guest on my podcast. All right. Thank you so much for helping out, and back to the show.
You went through this period of saying yes to everything. What happened? Did you read the surrender experiment, or how did you get
Oh,
this idea to just say yes? And you ended up in this improv class, and talk about that period.
oh man, it was, whew. I think I was in such a rock bottom state, like zero confidence, just really in fear. And I totally had
Mm,
PTSD that I had to recreate a whole community that I had left, like whole friend circle. And I think now you should know that I thrive in community. And for me to walk away from that life and all of those people, and I needed to do something completely different. And I didn't know what it was, but I definitely dove into all kinds of things. Improv and stand-up comedy were like my saving grace. And I remember one of my friends was saying, "Hey, like there's this thing, you should totally go to it." And I said, "Where is it at?" And they're like, "What's that, Second City?" And I'm like, "Second City, that's where people go where they want to be. But Saturday Night Live, I can't do
Saturday Night
that.
Live. Yeah.
That's not me." Literally, like the greats go there, right? And so I'm like, because it was in Chicago, and they're like, "Come on, I think it'd be good for you. I think you just try it out. Just try one." And I remember I was also reading The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer, and that was like on repeat in my life during that time. One of my favorite books, still all time. I feel like he's such a godsend. But of course, The Surrender Experiment was part of that. Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes, all of those books were just so pivotal during that time. And it was almost just, okay, fine. If it scares you, then just say yes to it. Just do it. Cause I was just on a mission to find people that were just so different than what suckiness that I was in at that time. And I did the improv. I said yes to a Bible study group, like hardcore, the non-denominational Christian group. And I'm so thankful for that community for the longest time. But then I became the leader of that small group. And then we started talking about all sorts of things. And then that turned into starting a book club, which then that turned into what we would call today like a female mastermind. Because again, I was looking for community. And as my human design is a generator, I just needed to generate like these different kinds of opportunities for myself. And that meant saying yes to even psychedelic experiences and yes to different kinds of shamans, yes to alternative modes of healing, yes to thought talk therapy, yes to just saying yes. What I was saying no to was male relationships at the time. That part of my life was definitely closed for a while until I was able to open up myself to love again. But I think I really needed to do the work for myself. And that meant looking at, I remember, gosh, one of the books that I read, because I definitely went into the whole narcissistic, codependent relationship, a ton of books that I was getting my PhD in that whole field at that time because I was just obsessed with, okay, how was I codependent? What were some of my characteristics? Why did I want that? And so it was like massive self growth and massive reading. I just became voracious at consuming to literally get out of this time. And one of the greatest things that I still keep today is the time at stand up comedy because that again legit scared me. I'm like, there's no way, like, how can you create a joke out of a one line? And it just required so much energy and so much thoughtfulness and specificity. And of course, me as a recovering perfectionist, I'm like, what if they don't laugh at my jokes? And so saying yes to that just blew my mind away. Where then entered a pitch competition for, I got into this VC realm of venture capitalists, and they were actually putting on an incubator. And I said I would be an angel investor because they needed women who were also small business owners to advise some of these females who were talking about their startups. And so I'm like, okay, what's a startup? Like, I didn't even know what that was. And they're, you have a startup. You started your dental practice. And I'm like, yeah. So I sat through one of these, and that again blew me to another level because in each of these instances, I was the small fish. I didn't want to be sat on Saturday Night Live. I didn't care to be a stand-up comedian. I didn't care to be a VC. I was not pitching to get money for a startup. I was just there, just saying yes to these opportunities. And what it started to happen was I started to say yes to some of the things that I really was passionate about, which was women and girls. And so then I started a nonprofit. And then that led me to San Francisco and going to the Bay Area and learning from people at the Stanford Business School because they then ran the nonprofit management school because they're teaching these nonprofits how to make money as well. And so that blew myself away because I'm like, wow, in medicine and in dentistry, no one's talking about this. No one's talking about failing first. We're all talking about how to be perfect and how to be lauded by the accomplishments that we've had. And it's very egoistic in that community where then you go into the startup community and they're like, yeah, I want you to fail. I'm not going to give you money until I see you have some sweat equity, some grit. That then changed my life because then as I was starting to gain momentum in my nonprofit, and it was very small, it ended up being something very national and local to these universities. But it really got my foot in the door being around really big giants and titans who was actually saving the water crisis, climate change. And then I realized, oh, wow, okay, this is my little tiny little effort here, but I can actually learn from some of these people who are really doing major things in the world. And once they got to know the resiliency and the emotional grit at the time that I was starting to cultivate and talk about as one of my talking pieces for the nonprofit as well, that's what would start my speaking career. And that's what would really start my advisory into the world of startups and angel investing, and then actually making the hard decision to sell my dental practice and move
Mhm.
to the Bay Area.
I love it. And so internally, what was your mental state like? You've done all this work, right? And you've been exposed to this whole other world. Did that help to cure the anxiety or whatever you felt or the PTSD that you had been carrying around since you were 16 years old?
Yeah, so I think it transmuted and it transformed into, oh wow, okay, there's something bigger than this. Because every time that I would share my story, whether it was at a high school, and many times, the speaking was at high schools or different organizations, and this was before it became these corporate events. Knowing that other people felt solace in hearing my story, it just gave me more fuel to, all right, this is what we're doing. And it also just activated more of, okay, I need to do more research on this. I need to do more research as to why we are suffering in our mental health, why in my dental world, our practice was growing at an exponential rate, 20, 30%. And I wasn't even there. My leadership completely changed. So many things completely changed when I started to just expand. And one of the concepts that I talk about in the book is really tap into your bounce factor. But it wasn't until that I was making peace with one of the pillars, which is your upbringing, and for me, making peace with my upbringing and really loving the fact that, hey, all of these things happened for me, was a huge
Mhm.
perspective shift, and allowing myself to get that support. Because that second pillar of building your bounce factor is, how are you invoking good stress, and how are you surrounding yourself and looking at your current environment right now, and is it actually supporting you? And one of the things that I knew I needed constantly was advisors, mentors, coaches, healers, people that would take me to that next level in my thinking, in the way that I operated, in the way that I was healing. And I honestly prioritized healing, because for a whole decade before that, I didn't even know. I had no idea. I became such a wellness and health geek, obviously, because I went through all those losses. And I also think that I became really obsessed with alternative modes of healing. And that's where it literally took me around the world.
Thank you so much for watching. Just FYI, we post a new video almost every day, so make sure you comment and subscribe below so you don't miss out on anything. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you're really going to love this one as well. And if you ever want to see a playlist of all of my podcasts or all of the plot twists or any other category of videos, you can find links to those in the description below.